remember this story clearly, as it always stuck in my mind whenever I think about playing hide-and-seek. In the dark or whenever I pass by an alleyway, I'll never forget what happened. It was in the fall, the start of October, and my 3 siblings and I went to visit my mom at her apartment. I have a sister, I'll call her Jess, and my 2 brothers. I'll call them Mike and Eli. My parents got divorced 2 years before that, and we barely saw my mother. So, this was a way for our dad to be a good parent and allow us to visit, even though he wasn't required to. My mom's apartment was in the sketchy part of town. A lot of buildings around the apartments, but it always felt so empty, even with it being so crowded. My mom's apartment was next to an alleyway, which was also considered an entrance to the apartment complex itself. That's what I mean when I say it was in a sketchy area. If you were to search for it, you probably wouldn't even be able to find it unless you were to go driving down a long, dark alleyway. My mom's apartment was on the 2nd story, and my siblings and I were always excited whenever we had the chance to visit her. I loved my mom. She was small and cozy. Her apartment, too, was also very comfortable. It reminded me of my grandma's place with soft furniture and unnecessary decor lying around. Another great thing about her apartment was her neighbors. A while back when we visited, we made friends with the neighbors downstairs, a boy and a girl, who I'll call Zach and Cheech. Zach and I played a lot in the parking lot area of the apartment complex next to the alleyway. Typical games like cops and robbers, tag, and kickball. But this day in particular, we decided, since it was October near Halloween, we should play hide-and-seek. He came up with the idea of playing it outside at night. My siblings, of course, wanted to join, and we all decided that at 9 o'clock, we'd all leave our rooms and go play. Since it was October, night came by pretty fast, and so did the dark, which resulted in pretty spooky lighting that we wanted to have. It was me, Zach, Chi-Chi, my sister, and my 2 brothers all playing. So, once it hit 9 o'clock, we all did exactly as planned and left our rooms and joined each other outside. It was quite dark around the corners of the building, but the tall lampposts lit the parking lot with its orange, rusty color. Whenever we played a game involving a tagger or seeker, we did that little game of bubblegum in a dish. So, tonight we did just that. And we did it until Zach became the seeker. Everyone ran off into their little hiding spots, not too far off the complex boundaries, but not only limited to the parking lot itself. I remember I ran with my sister Jess, who I always stuck with, because she was the oldest. We ran over near the back of the apartment building by the large garbage bins. The only way to go here was to enter the long alleyway and go further down until the end of the building was exposed. And that's what we did. We figured that they wouldn't go all the way over here, so it was the perfect spot. As Zach yelled, "Ready or not," the game began. At first it was exciting, but the excitement quickly went away once we actually started to just wait for him to find us. A lot of silence, except the noise of the night. I started to get impatient, and so did my sister, but she whispered to me that they would eventually come by and find us. But a couple of minutes later, we started to get bored. I did, at least. I said, "Maybe we hid too well," and she laughed. She told me that maybe we should just go and forfeit since it was becoming a little late. We started to get through the garbage bags and past the large garbage bins, and then we were dead in the middle of the alleyway. That's when my heart dropped. I faced the end of the alley and met a figure standing in the alley light. I knew it wasn't anyone. I knew since the person was extremely tall, as if someone put on extra inches in their shoes to look taller and the light made it hard to see their face, since it was directly from the top, so their hair made a large shadow on it. But then I realized something. Their hair, it was an afro, and it was colorful, like a clown wig. The worst thought came into my mind. It was a clown, and looking at the clothing, it did appear to be a clown. It wasn't even Halloween yet, so why was there someone dressed as a clown in the alleyway? What was scary was that the person just stood there, not moving a single muscle, and they were staring right at us. My sister pulled me back, seeing that there was something strange going on. She told me we should probably go back with the others, and so we did. We went down the long alleyway in hopes of finding our friends and brothers. Luckily, we found one of my brothers, Mike, and then Chi-Chi was also there. Mike was confused as to why we were just walking out in the open. He thought we were still playing. We told him that we saw something weird, and we explained the weird guy dressed as a clown at the end of the alleyway. Where we were at was still technically in view of the clown, and so we moved aside to show them what we saw. And that's when we started to realize the situation was much more than we thought it was. The clown was closer, watching us and waving at us. Now we saw its face. It wasn't normal makeup. It was all black, like they didn't want their face to be seen. The only feature we could notice was their eyes, which, to me as a kid, made it a lot scarier. And then, suddenly, Chi-Chi screamed. We turned around to her, and she screamed out loud, "There's another person watching us." And she was right. It was another person, also a clown, but with green hair and longer legs. We knew at this moment we had to go. Chi-Chi and Mike ran away, and we didn't hesitate to follow. Chi-Chi ran to her room, and we ran upstairs to ours. We then met up with Eli, who was already in the room talking to our mom. Our mom gave us the biggest hugs, and we were confused. Like, did she know what happened? Eli explained that he told our mom what happened to him. Turns out, Eli was hiding in the apartment complex's courtyard, and he heard footsteps, thinking it was Zach. He hid behind a bush and barely saw the person as they stepped in front. He thought Zach was about to catch him, but then he heard Zach's voice calling Eli. Eli turned and was found by Zach saying, "I found you." That's when he turned back and looked up, and a clown was looking directly down at him. Eli ran away with Zach, and they both went to his apartment to tell his parents what happened. We explained what happened to us, and our mom was happy that we were all okay. I wished it ended there, but it didn't. Later that night, everyone was asleep, but I got thirsty. In the middle of the night, I went to get a bottle of water from the fridge, and I heard noise coming from outside the window. And looking back now as an adult, it was very stupid of me, but I went to the noise. It was weird. I remember questioning how it was possible for something to be knocking against the window, especially on the second floor. This part is what really scared the living daylights out of me. When I lifted up the blinds, I came face to face with the clown, the same exact clown my sister and I saw. He was looking right at me, and that's when I screamed and ran to my mom. She came me out, and when I went to show her what I saw, like a cliche from a horror movie, it was gone before she could see it. Luckily, my mom was a good mother, and she believed me. Ever since that day, I never liked playing hide and seek in the dark, and I've hated alleyways since. I don't know how that person got up to the window. I guess they climbed, but I'm glad that nothing really happened that night besides a few scares. The story I am about to tell you happened to me when I was 11. I was in 6th grade. The school I attended was across the street from a beat-up-looking house that honestly scared the living daylights out of me as a kid. It just looked old and disgusting, and I couldn't understand why. If someone was living there, they were okay with how the outside of their house looked. Whenever my friends and I passed by that house on our way home from school, they'd make fun of it. I would scold them and say that the owner of the house wouldn't be too happy to see a couple of middle schoolers making fun of a place where they lived. Of course, my friends made fun of me for being scared of a reaction. I was a pretty big scaredy cat as a kid, seemingly afraid of an adult's angry reaction all the time. So, they were not wrong. Passing that house was okay at first, but once October came, and my friends were staying after school for the programs they did, things started going downhill from there. It started in the second week of October, my first time walking home from school alone in a while. As per usual, I walked by that creepy house, but this time something was off and different. As I passed, I noticed someone from the house window was standing still, seemingly staring directly at me as I walked by. I was freaked out by that, of course, but nothing happened besides that, so I brushed it off. But it kept happening as the days went by, with me walking home from school with that same person watching me from their window. I couldn't tell if they were male or female, but it didn't matter to me. I was scared shitless about being watched. I would tell my friends about it, and they would shrug it off and say that maybe the person was playing an early Halloween trick on me and trying to purposely scare me. I believed them and would scold myself for being scared easily. But a week before Halloween, as I'm doing my usual walking home alone from school routine, I noticed the tall silhouette of a figure standing on the porch of that house, watching me walk by. I was scared, but I tried to be calm and brave and walked past the house. That's when things took a bad turn. As primera, Walakadbi, the figure suddenly flew down the steps and started to chase me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and put some pep in my step and started to run. It seemed like I wasn't running fast enough. Whoever was chasing me was gaining on me. The person was seemingly a dude, judging by the voice, and he was yelling things at me that made absolutely zero sense at all. I knew I had to hide somewhere, and quick. So, I ducked into an alleyway and hid behind a dumpster that smelled horrible, trying not to make any sudden noise that would help this crazy person find me and potentially hurt me. I could hear his footsteps stop by the alleyway, and I could also hear him mumbling words to himself as he walked closer to the dumpster I was crouching behind. My heart was leaping out of my chest, and I was praying that he wouldn't peek behind the dumpster and find me. I could literally hear his breathing to the point that I felt like he was going to find where I was hiding. But then, I suddenly heard his footsteps running away from the alleyway. I remained crouched on the ground as I collected myself and wanted to make sure that the man was truly gone. Once I felt like the coast was clear, I ran the rest of the way home, and as soon as I entered, I told my parents what happened, and my dad decided to call the police. They arrived at our house in 20 minutes, and they had me explain what exactly happened and which house that man came from to chase me. Once they had that information, they let me and my parents know they would give us an update the next day. They stood by their words, and it came to light that nobody lived in that house. It had been vacant for years, which didn't make any sense. The police suggested that a homeless man or squatter most likely stayed in that house and, for whatever reason, decided he wanted to scare me. Nothing was done after that, and when I told my friends, even they were in shock and disbelief. Thanks to that day, I still get scared whenever I pass a house that looks creepy or abandoned. Even with me being 22 now, that day is still fresh in my brain. I come from a rural area in Poland. My country is still very much Christian, so Halloween isn't really widely celebrated. Many older people perceive it as satanic. Still, nowadays, many decorate their porches with stacked pumpkins, some surprisingly made into jack-o'-lanterns, even in the countryside. At that time, I had a habit of taking my dog, Susie, for a walk each evening. It was mostly because Susie's rather on the larger side, and going out with her during the day was literally a nightmare. She used to hate kids and cyclists, so she would bark all the time and try to bite them. In the fall, it gets dark here pretty quickly. So, 8 o'clock p.m. seems practically like the middle of the night. You can't see where you're going if there are no lanterns or street lights. That day, it was dark already, and so I went out with my dog. There's a small road that I really like going on. It leads from the village supermarket, which is quite close to my house, to a church. It's not very long. It takes you maybe 10 minutes on foot. On one side of the road, there's a forest, and on the other side, a large horse stud. It's pretty obvious that at night the path was practically empty, and you rarely met anyone there. I used to love the autumn vibes. Cold breeze, crunching leaves under your feet, and the feeling of solitude were perfectly nostalgic. I was walking like that, lost in my thoughts. I was approaching the end of the road where the forest met an old stable, which belonged to the local parish priest. As far as I know, it fell out of use many years ago, before I was even born. At that point, I was jolted out of my thoughts by Susie, who suddenly started barking like crazy. I looked around, trying to see if maybe a cyclist or another dog was approaching, but then I realized she was only focused on the stable and the trees. I should mention it was very hard to see anything beyond the tree line, as the street lights were very dim and old in that place. My dog was acting as if she had literally gone mad, barking, growling, pulling hard on the leash. It wasn't typical of her, even when a bike went right by. I looked into the trees, trying to see what caused her to act so unhinged, and then I saw it. Maybe D is to 20 meters away, right behind the priest's stable. I could see the silhouette of a man. At first, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. I thought it must have been a bush, but the closer I looked, I realized it was definitely a person. Judging by the way his clothes reflected the moonlight, he must have been wearing all white. He was kneeling with his back straight, not really hiding, but not exactly in plain sight either. This gave me chills. I realized he was wearing some kind of white robe. He wasn't moving at all, just looking in my direction. I pulled hard on the leash, trying to get Susie to move, but she was stubborn. I told myself there was no way I was staying there a second longer, so I grabbed her by the harness and took off rather quickly. I didn't want to run because I was still unsure if the man realized that I had seen him. Thankfully, the church was only a minute away, and I saw some people standing by it. For a moment, I contemplated telling them about the person, but what would I exactly say? That there was somebody sitting near the bushes? The rest of my way home had to be the most nerve-wracking walk of my life. Every couple of steps, I looked back to make sure no one was following me. Even my dog wasn't sniffing around anymore. She was just walking quickly, straight ahead. I did get home without any further problems, but I wish I could say it was the end of my story. That night, I was woken up to multiple sirens wailing. They went off for a good half hour. The next morning, I saw in the local news that somebody had set the priest's stable on fire. People were saying that it was probably some drunk teenagers trying to play a prank and pull stupid tricks, but I knew damn well I hadn't seen giggling teenage boys in the previous evening. The person I saw looked disturbingly calm, as if they were waiting for something. There could possibly have been more people hiding in the shed, but if so, I'm happy I didn't actually see them, or I might have had a panic attack. I really do want to be the one contributing to the propaganda that Halloween is a satanic festival, but what I saw that night was really disturbing. A person wearing white robes, silently kneeling just out of the reach of the streetlights. What bothers me most is that between the time I saw him and the time of the fire, at least 5 or 6 hours passed. Like, were they kneeling there the whole time? What on earth were they doing there for most of the night? However, I do feel very relieved that he didn't decide to follow or even acknowledge me that night, and that Susie didn't pull me even closer to him. If that person, or rather those people, were willing to set the whole building on fire, I don't want to know what else they were capable of doing. Story. For last October, I went to a pumpkin patch with my friends. It was right after school, and the air was cold and crisp. The leaves were orange and yellow, and the ground was covered in fallen leaves. We had been looking forward to this all week. The patch was small but busy. Families were walking around. Kids were running with their parents, and the smell of baked goods from a small stand filled the air. We parked and grabbed a small wagon to carry our pumpkins. There were rows of pumpkins everywhere, big and small. We walked down one row and found some nice pumpkins to pick. Everything felt normal at first. My friend Kevin dared me to pick the biggest pumpkin at the back of the patch, the one that was near a little wooded area. I laughed and agreed. The path to the pumpkin was narrow. The further we went, the fewer people we saw. The laughter and chatter from the main area faded behind us. I noticed the trees around us were thick, and the shadows were long in the late afternoon sunlight. The wind made the leaves rustle, and it sounded like whispers. I tried not to think about it. When we reached the pumpkins, I noticed something strange. Behind the pumpkins, near the trees, there was a figure. At first, I thought it was a scarecrow. It was standing very still with a hat on, and its arms were out like a cross. But then I realized it was too thin to be a scarecrow, and the hat moved slightly, like someone breathing under it. "Do you guys see that?" I whispered. Kevin turned and looked, but he shrugged. "Probably just a decoration," he said. I wasn't sure. I had a bad feeling in my stomach. I picked up the pumpkin quickly, trying not to stare. The figure didn't move from beyond the tree. It just stayed there. We started walking back to the main area, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. The figure seemed closer. I couldn't tell if it was moving or if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Kevin noticed I was acting weird. "Stop looking back," he said, laughing. I didn't want to. Something about it made my skin crawl. When we reached the edge of the pumpkin rows, I turned to get one last look. The figure was gone. I felt a small sense of relief, thinking maybe it was just a person walking behind the trees or someone's costume. We headed toward the stand to pay for our pumpkins. The path was slightly darker now. The sun was almost gone, and the shadows were thick. As we passed the wooded area again, I heard a crack. It sounded like a branch snapping. Kevin didn't hear it. I stopped and said, "Did you hear that?" Kevin shook his head. I turned slowly, and my heart stopped. The figure was there again, about 10 feet behind us. No arms out this time. It was just standing. Kevin noticed I stopped moving and asked what's wrong. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. The figure started to tilt its head, like it was studying us. Then, seemingly without moving its legs, it started to move forward. It didn't even look like it was walking normally. It looked more like it was gliding, almost floating over the leaves. I grabbed Kevin's arm, and we ran toward the stand. Our pumpkins bounced in the wagon as we ran. I could hear leaves crunching behind us faster than they should have if it was just walking. When we reached the main area, people were still there, laughing and eating Premier Lukt Bach. The figure stopped at the edge of the pumpkin rows. It just stopped and watched. We paid for our pumpkins and got in the car as fast as we could. I didn't look back again. On the drive home, I told Kevin to promise me he didn't see anyone like that. He said he didn't, that he only saw the pumpkins and the trees. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that damn figure standing there. I couldn't stop thinking about the way it moved, the way it looked like it glided. I tried to convince myself it was a Halloween prank, but it didn't feel like a joke. That was a family-friendly pumpkin patch, and that would be way too scary for little kids. A few days later, I read online that someone had reported seeing a strange person in a costume at the same pumpkin patch. They said it was late afternoon near the trees, and the person didn't speak or move like a normal person. The story didn't give names or faces, just the report. I haven't gone back to that patch since. Every October, when the leaves start falling and the air gets cold, I remember that figure. I remember the way it moved, and I remember thinking if it had wanted to, it could have followed us all the way to the car. I still don't fully have an explanation for it. I tell this story to friends, but most think I'm exaggerating. I'm not, and I could still picture it standing behind those trees, watching us.